All right, so I'm going to get us started today talking about the importance of critical thinking and organism identification using current technology. There we go. All right, so we're going to start with a clicker warm-up question here. I want you guys to turn the power on your clickers, and then we're going to look for that timer in the top corner. You can see that it's running, so we know that we're running here. Try to select your answers pretty promptly as we go through this because we're going to ask a lot of clicker questions. And know that all of your questions, all your answers here are completely anonymous. We can't tell who clicked it. We can just see total numbers up here in the top corner. So my test question here, which of these best describes you? Get a feel for who's in our audience today. We do have, as usual, a majority for laboratorians joining us for this meeting, but really wonderful to see. We've got some public health department members, some people who consider themselves other outside of this group, some administrators, so it's really great to have a diverse audience here today. All right. So I'm going to present today in the format of case series. Let's talk through actual real-life scenarios that you might encounter in the lab to get us starting to think about how we use critical thinking every day in the laboratory. So in my first case, Linda, the laboratorian, is working on blood cultures Tuesday afternoon. She notices tiny pinpoint colonies growing on a blood agar plate. Should she A, send it to MALDI, B, gather more information, or C, put it back in the incubator to wait for more growth? So at the very first thing in the morning, as she's just starting to look at plates, already she's starting to use those critical thinking skills. What do I do next? What's the appropriate next step in working up this culture? Now, Linda decides in this particular scenario that she's going to gather more information. Here's the trick. Okay. So Linda reviews the gram stain and sees that it was reported as small, faintly staining gram-negative or gram-positive rods. Start over. There we go. The culture showed no growth yesterday and was put back into the incubator and is now 48 hours out of the blood culture bottle. Should she send it to MALDI, gather more information, and put it back in the incubator to wait for more growth? So still a little bit of a mix of answers, but the majority of people here decided that we were going to gather more information, and that is what she decided to do as well. Oh, sorry. In this case, she decided to send it to MALDI. Since the gram stain was positive, she decided to run the MALDI. The Vitek MALDI returns the result of Ochrobactrum anthropi. Should she report it as O. anthropi, gather more information, or ask for help? Well, I think I did miss another slide there. Yeah, I'm going to go back. Sorry, some key information here too. She reviewed the gram stain. The culture showed no growth yesterday. Oh, we're good. Okay. So she decided to report it as Ochrobactrum anthropi in this case. So unfortunately, she picked the wrong ID. She made the wrong choice in a specific scenario. And let's stop and think why this wasn't the best course of action as she went through. What fits that identification and what doesn't fit that identification? So we know it fits. There are case reports of bloodstream infections with O. anthropi. It's not completely unheard of, although this is a pretty unusual organism. What doesn't fit Well, Oanthropy is a gram-negative coccobacillus, and the gram states had gram-positive. And Oanthropy grows on MacConkey. There was no growth on the MacConkey plate. So what else could it be? Now, hopefully, a lot of you were thinking through this and had some things flag in your mind that this could be something different. This could be a brucella, and that's actually what this turned out to be in this particular case. This was a missed identification of a select agent in the laboratory. So how could she have done this differently? So if we look at biochemical testing for brucella and Oanthropy, they're both catalase positive, oxidase positive, urease positive. The only difference is the growth on EMB or MacConkey. There's no growth for brucella, and there is growth for Oanthropy. Now, we ought to think more critically about Oanthropy itself. So like we said, we know that there are cases of Oanthropy blooded stream infections, but they're very rare, and they're only in immune-compromised people so far in the case reports. If she had gone back to check the patient's chart, she could have seen that this was a completely immune-competent patient and had a history of hunting feral hogs. Some big red flags to be going off of that one. Now, if she wasn't sure at this point, if she didn't remember about the growth differences on EMB versus MacConkey, asking others for help can certainly be a key thing when you're not really sure what to do yourself. You can talk with the clinician and get their perspective. Maybe it wasn't in the chart that they did hog hunting, but you can talk through this of, I'm not sure what this is. I'm getting this identification, but it could be this other thing, and talk through what additional testing might be appropriate. Brucella antibody testing can also help in this specific case if that was ordered by the clinician. Now, 16S sequencing can distinguish these organisms, but this could be dangerous if it's brucella. You don't want to be working with something that could be brucella in the laboratory. The good news is you've got a resource. An LRN lab can tell these apart. We use a brucella-specific PCR and a BSL-3 laboratory, and we can get you that answer to help confirm which organism this is. So what else could have triggered different action along the way to help her down a different path? Now, we said early on that this was a gram-positive, tiny gram-positive, but we've heard from case reports here at the WCLN conferences and journal reports, brucella can sometimes appear gram-positive. This is an image in a publication of a gram-positive brucella, and that should not alone rule out brucella for you as you're going through your workup process. If you have that slow-growing pinpoint colonies, no growth on MacConkey, start thinking through, could this be brucella even though it's gram-positive? And most importantly, as you're working through this, if you can't rule out a select agent, send it to an LRN lab. And that's really the most important part as you're going through here. She couldn't rule out brucella before the MALDI, so that was really the thing that she should have been following more closely. Now, while Linda the laboratorian is fictional, this case study is real. This did come from an actual patient who had done wild hog hunting, and it's not the only case report of misidentifying brucella as Oanthropy. This case series I've got here is 8 different published case studies from Oanthropy misidentified as a misidentification from a brucella for melitensis and suis from a wide variety, I'm not sure how well you can see that, a wide variety of different identification methods here as well. And these are just the ones that were published and the ones that were caught. So you think, how many other times has this actually happened? And worst of all, what are the consequences of missing that identification? A delayed or misdiagnosis can lead to increased morbidity and mortality for our patients and an increased risk to laboratorians. This publication below here is from a misidentification of a brucella as an Oanthropy that led to a laboratory-acquired brucellosis. So what can we do to help keep this from happening? Keep learning, stay informed, be aware, use those critical thinking skills every day when you're in the laboratory. Some things that we know is that all Ochrobacterium species, unfortunately to complicate this whole situation, were recently reclassified into the Brucella genus. They're very closely related, and through some deep sequencing analysis, they found that they've combined them all into one large genus. How could you have been aware of this? Well, it was recently sent out in a message by the CDC Locks group. You can sign up for email notifications from them. It goes out to clinical laboratories. Came out this December. Several journals were publishing that this was coming in advance, and we sent it out in a WCLN lab message in January. We've talked about it at multiple conferences. Aaron gave a great presentation about this not too long ago. So we know there are a lot of resources and a lot of ways that you can stay up to date and connected to help learn about these changes as name changes happen within the system. Now for them, this is a pretty new change. How long does it take for an automated system to get updated with the new nomenclature? That can take a little while as well. So being aware and alert makes you more prepared than an instrument can be. You can learn that faster than updating software in most cases. So what is the impact of this genus name change? The biggest change here is that Brucella is no longer a pure select agent genus. Well, we had thought if it's Brucella, it's a select agent. Well, it's no longer the case. And once software is updated with this name change, automated instruments that give a result of Brucella in your laboratory should still trigger select agent rule-out procedures. Well, it could be an Ochrobacterium, it could be a select agent Brucella as well. So if you ever see Brucella coming up on your system, go back and start thinking through those select agent procedures. All right, so thinking through our case as a whole, the evolving nature of science will result in gaps between agreed upon naming conventions and electronic databases. It's going to happen. Science is going to continue to evolve. We're going to continue to go through these name changes. It's important to be aware of instrument limitations and to question results that don't make sense. And most importantly for all of us here, a strong educational base, career experience, and lifelong learning provide the tools needed for effective critical thinking. So let's take a step back. We're going to talk the entire day about critical thinking. What is critical thinking? How are we using this? What is really that definition? So it's defined as the objective analysis and evaluation of an issue in order to form a judgment. Well, that's pretty broad. That applies to everything. You're using critical thinking every day, all the time. You think about it when you're crossing the street. Will this car hit me before I cross? Can I cross safely here? Cooking a new recipe. As it comes out, did your souffle poof up or did it fall? Does this look right? And if you ever get the feeling that this doesn't seem right, you should investigate further. That's where the critical thinking skills come into play. Now, one of the most amazing things about the human brain I heard recently is we're trying to teach AI computer systems to behave like the human brain. And while we can do a mathematical calculation on a napkin or on a piece of paper, our brain is doing so much more below the surface. You can pick up an opaque bottle and tilt it back and forth and judge how much liquid is in that without having to physically weigh it and do a mathematical calculation. You can judge how fast a car is moving just because of your experience and your brain working under the surface. And you need to be able to trust those instincts in the laboratory. It's often laboratorians who are first able to recognize new patterns, new outbreaks, unusual things, because it's different than the patterns that you're used to seeing every day. So trust those innate skills that you have. Ultimately, our goal is to have accurate testing for our patients. All right, so we're going to go into case 2 here. You might have to turn your clickers back on. It's gone to sleep. So Linda the laboratorian is back from spring break vacation. I know a lot of us are at this point. And she's getting ready to report out gonorrhea results from an automated instrument. She sees that 10 of the 50 results, about 20%, from that day's run are positive. Should she report the results because the instrument did all the work, gather more information, ask for help? We've got 100% on gather more information. I think you can see my trend and pattern here. All right. So she decided to gather more information. The number of positives seems to be abnormally high to Linda. She normally only sees 1 to 3 positives a day. She knows that most of their testing comes from low-risk asymptomatic screening in a clinic setting. Does this information, as she's thinking through, change her course of action here? Would you report results, gather more information, or ask for help? Wonderful. I'm seeing a lot more people asking for help. If you're not sure, if you've not spent many years in the laboratory, or you don't know if this is significant or not, asking others for help can absolutely be useful. So she decided to gather more information. She decides to review the average percent positivity of this test and sees the rate was 3.8% last year. However, her lab routinely sees higher spikes after spring break. There's the seasonality to it, different spikes that come up. So remembering this information, having those resources on hand in the laboratory, would you now report results, gather more information, or ask for help? Yeah, I've got a mix of answers here. So she decided at this point to ask for help. Linda, the laboratorian, tells her colleague Larry, the laboratorian, she has a really high positivity in this run. Larry agrees that it is pretty high, higher than he's used to seeing, and mentions that they had a large influx of specimens from a post-spring break university testing event. With this additional information, would you now report results, gather more information, or ask for help? So I see a lot of people thinking through, there's an explanation for a high rate. There's a reason why this is higher than usual. It makes sense. It helps to put it together. So Linda decides she's still not totally satisfied. She's going to gather a little bit more information. The rate still seems unusually high to her, even for a high-risk patient population. She knows that those rates can be different from those different patient populations. But she decides to review the pattern of positive samples in the run to see if there's anything suspicious. And if she's looking at the way the instrument runs is from left to right and top to bottom, reds are negatives, greens are positives. The darker the green, the more positive it is. So this is a molecular test with a relative fluorescent unit readout, for example. With this information in mind, would you report results, gather more information, or ask for help? All right. Linda decides at this point to ask for help. She decides the high positivity rate, 20%, and the pattern in the run is suspicious for contamination. She's seen this kind of contamination before, she's got that experience behind her, and she does decide to not report the results at this point. She shares her suspicions with the lab manager and director. From the investigation that follows, the follow-up when you suspect contamination. Now, I'm going to go through a theoretical, not every lab is going to do it the exact same way, but this is one example of how you can follow up in that kind of situation. So testing is halted during the investigation. A wipe test is performed and identifies contamination within the instrument. The director asks for a checkerboard test to be performed, and if you've not seen these, this is where you put known positives and known negatives in an every other pattern on a checkerboard, and then you look to see if the negatives come up as positives inappropriately, and that can be a sign that you have ongoing contamination issues within your instrument. And sure enough, they had some low positives pop up where they shouldn't have been, confirming their suspicions that this could be contamination issues with the instrument. So maintenance was requested and identifies an alignment issue that resulted in carryover and splashing within the instrument, which is why those wipe tests were coming up positive. So after repairs are completed, the instrument is cleaned and wipe tests are repeated and come back negative. That's good news. The checkerboard is repeated and passes, no signs of carryover and contamination. So they decided to go look at the past results and review them to see if the error impacted any other patients, and suspicious patterns are seen in 3 other runs. All positive specimens from the impacted runs were repeated and corrected reports issued if needed, if there was any false positives identified. Now, if specimens were no longer available, I know we don't all have endless fridge and freezer space. It's always an issue in the lab. Clinicians were contacted to explain the issue and recommend retesting if it was appropriate. Thanks to Linda's critical thinking, several patients did not receive false positive gonorrhea results. So she took all these different pieces together. It's not just one thing. It started with that initial feeling of, wow, this doesn't seem right. This is unusually high, and put that all together for this. And what we learned from this is that instruments can fail. Even though they are so efficient and pump out massive number of results, you can have failures within your instruments. Knowing your patient population and what's normal for your patient population, what's normal seasonality, can really help you in determining if this is an unusual result or not. Investigating when results are outside of normal range can help you dig down and answer those questions. It doesn't necessarily make sense to do a deep dig review on every single run that pops out, but recognizing those red flags that something might not be right can really help you find the answers. And finally, the experience and expertise of your colleagues can help you troubleshoot during an investigation. You don't have to do this alone. There is so much additive knowledge within your institution, so much experience, that if you're not sure, go ask someone else for help. So altogether, as we're thinking through our discussions for today, I hope you come away with this thinking through that critical thinking is necessary for accurate testing diagnosis. You need to be informed. There are so many resources for you, conferences like this, webinars, journals. Knowing your data within your institution, your patient populations, and knowing the limitations of your instrumentation can go a long way in helping you to get the most accurate results for your patients. Don't go on autopilot thinking the instrument is foolproof. No instrument is foolproof, and no instrument to this date is as powerful as your brain and your ability to recognize these patterns. So stop and ask every time you report a result, does this make sense? And trust your instincts. You guys are all very well-educated, well-informed people. If something doesn't feel right, look into it. With that, I'm happy to pass this back to Erin and our next speakers. Thanks so much for listening.